ADHD is not just boys being boys or just a naughty boy's disease, or simply a problem with not letting kids play. It is often mistaken for a mental illness or some kind of brain damage, rather than a fundamental difference in neurology. The initialism literally means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, originally a description of what a diagnostician would look for in a patient. Unfortunately, ADHD taken as a literal description only describes a small percentage of the people who are actually diagnosed with ADHD. This is going to be a fairly brief overview of ADHD in a nutshell. For more in-depth information, check out our website, link in the description, where we have lots of ADHD content. You can also book to see us, either face-to-face if you are local or through telehealth if you aren't. Humans have more than one neurotype, where the biggest group, a little over half the population, we think, are called neurotypical. ADHD is the next biggest neurotype, and being different from the typical is considered neurodivergent. ADHD is old, being first medically recorded by Melchior Adam Wiechert, or Wiechert, in Der Philosophische Arts, Volume 4, 1779, a medical text from over 250 years ago. The description of who fits the lost attention diagnosis disorders is very similar to modern diagnostic manuals. ADHD has also been called hyperactive syndrome, hyperkinetic syndrome, maladjusted children, minimal brain dysfunction, and ADD, all obsolete names. ADHD has been the medical name for the last 35 years. Unfortunately, most of the methods of diagnosis is still based on the old stigmatized, poorly behaved model, leading to struggles to be recognized if you aren't misbehaving or suffering enough or female. ADHD has a few diagnostic subtypes. To understand that, we first have to recognize that the modern ADHD initialism is describing what your brain is doing more than what your body is doing. The attention deficit refers to how your brain isn't paying attention to what you should be paying attention to. Of course, the definition of should is a bit contentious. Hyperactivity is more about how your brain is overly active, trying to compensate for not enough neurotransmitters in your frontal lobes and amygdala. It is called a disorder because it interferes with capitalism and or the neurotypical status quo. It was only from around 1944 that the newly synthesized methylphenidate was found to help people diagnosed with what we now call ADHD. You may know this chemical by the pet name that the chemist who made it, Leandro Panizon, called it Ritalin, after his wife, Rita Margarita. Amphetamines were the next major success in helping people with ADHD in the early 1960s. It is from these medications that we finally understand what is behind ADHD. Modern studies have shown us that methylphenidate and amphetamines improve dopamine and noradrenaline in the frontal lobes and central brain regions. From here, we were able to recognize that a number of similar conditions were all the same thing. That is, ADHD is considered to be a spectrum condition, where the appearance and experience of ADHD is varied, but the fundamental cause is quite similar. This is why the medical subtypes of ADHD exist. Inattentive for people that tune out, hyperactive for physical movements, and combined for those who show both traits most of the time. ADHD is often underdiagnosed as it requires a specialist trained and qualified in ADHD to recognize its root cause. This leads many ADHDers to be misdiagnosed with anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder, bipolar affective disorder, substance misuse disorder, and more. Some of the secondary behavioral quirks can also lead to faulty presentations and assumptions, such as eating disorder, various addiction problems, self-harm, and suicidality. ADHD is very common. It is estimated to be between 2 to 5% of the general population, with as many as 40% of some subpopulations having been diagnosed. Any condition that is more than 1% of the population is considered to be a part of being human. Often, The high diagnosis percentages in subpopulations are correlated strongly with those who have survived a crisis, such as refugee populations, adding to the mistake of thinking that ADHD is a trauma response. ADHD is not a trauma response. The self-management of ADHD can be adversely affected by trauma. My opinion of why ADHD is found in higher proportions in people who have survived strong adversity, such as refugees, is because ADHD is a strong survival trait. The other members of that population didn't make it. ADHD is congenital. That is, you are born with ADHD. You don't develop it through an experience like trauma or mimicking someone who has ADHD, and so on. There is a definition in some countries of acquired ADHD, where some forms of brain damage can seem similar and are also positively treated by the same medications as ADHD. So, some similarities in diagnostic behaviors. ADHD is strongly inherited. That is, ADHD is genetically passed on from the parent to the child with around about 80% confidence, possibly more. And that's only from one parent who matches the criteria for ADHD, whether they've been diagnosed or not. Often ADHD is in relationships that have lasted for more than 6 months, but dating another ADHDer. If you have one person in a family with a diagnosis of ADHD, it's smart to check for everyone else too. Most people with ADHD neurology benefit from medications. Many lay people misunderstand what the medication does, leading to the mistaken view that taking ADHD medication is the same as taking recreational drugs or taking smart pills. What the medication is doing is at the least helping to make the neurotransmitters dopamine and adrenaline more efficiently used in the frontal cortex and the central brain. Imagine that your car got more efficient with its fuel. The same amount of fuel will get your car to go further before conking out. If you only have a small tank, that means your car can now do more things and look like a car with a bigger tank. ADHD behavior is mostly around trying to make a small amount of neurotransmitter last the longest and not get wasted on things that your base survival biology doesn't think are important, like study. If the brain fuel is more biologically efficiently used, then this avoidance of non-biologically important aspects is reduced. The other effect that some of the ADHD medications have is helping your brain generate just a bit more dopamine than usual in those same locations, effectively increasing the size of your tank. When neurotypical people was tested on taking ADHD medication, neither the subjects nor the cognitive tests they took could tell the difference between 10 milligrams of Adderall or 10 milligrams of sugar, the placebo. The same test applied to ADHDers found that both the subjects and the cognitive tests could tell the difference. That is, the medications don't make everyone smart. They only help ADHDers access their brains, and at properly scripted dosages, the medicine doesn't get people high. Most ADHDers benefit from regular exercise, ideally daily. This has been strongly correlated to a reduction of the amount of medication needed, or an increase in how long an ADHDer can get benefit from those same medications. Not all ADHDers benefit from this. Many ADHDers struggle with diet. The ratio of food high in fat, sugar, carbohydrates, protein and salt is much higher in the general daily food intake for an ADHDer in comparison to a non-ADHDer. And often, ADHDers will hunt for these foods when feeling brain fog, needing to concentrate, or feeling mood dysregulated. These are considered to be the dopamine-chasing foods, as eating them triggers a biological dopamine release reward. Protein is the only item on that list that actually helps your body synthesize dopamine and noradrenaline. An excess of dopamine-chasing foods, aka junk food, frequently leads to obesity and malnutrition and a high risk of diabetes type 2. The other major dietary problem that ADHDers struggle with is allergies and food intolerances. Allergies are often easy to spot due to the obvious signs of hives, welts, and hospitalization. Intolerances are subtle and hard to spot and are generally more experienced as various gastrointestinal difficulties such as IBS or malabsorption of nutrients and the cognitive and mood destabilization that those foods trigger. That is, you get brain fog or your mood goes out of kilter just after you've eaten the thing. Sometimes, though, we get a mood boost followed by a long mood deficit. Let's talk briefly about dopamine and noradrenaline. Dopamine can be considered to be the fuel that runs the part of your brain collectively called the executive function. This helps you to keep track of recent events, plan into the future, hold on to a temporary bit of information whilst doing a thing, understanding what things actually mean beyond the surface level, and solve problems in creative ways. Low dopamine leads to losing track of things, not understanding nuance, and breakdown in creativity and problem solving. Noradrenaline can be considered to be the threat detection system and is directly connected to your mood being accurate to the circumstance. Part of detecting threats is sensory perception, and this is tuned by the brain to be useful. Noradrenaline also allows you to initiate and complete tasks. Low noradrenaline leads to mood dysregulation, sensory sensitivity, hyperreactivity, and the inability to initiate tasks without being stressed. Sometimes we have too much noradrenaline, and this can lead to feeling paranoid or connecting the wrong ideas behind things. Some of these difficulties can be overcome by behavioral strategies, but you need to have enough executive function capacity to follow the strategies and enough mood stability to be able to focus on those. So if you have insufficient executive function or mood regulation, you need medication to help. While most ADHDers do benefit from medication and non-medical help, such as therapy and coaching, it is very important to recognize that with different neurology comes a strong difference in what it is to be human and what kind of culture we form. So far, we've only focused on ADHD as a medical condition. There is more to having an ADHD brain than medical problems. ADHD is an identity. An ADHD identity is not the best name, but it's what we have. ADHDers are very creative, can handle stressful situations very well, and are better than average survivors. They're not very good at peace or boredom. Which is ironic, as many ADHDers are unhappy trying to be neurotypical, and with the ongoing struggle to get access to your own brain's resources, we see a very high death rate in undiagnosed ADHDers, primarily from suicide, estimated to be around 20%. While ADHDers may be very good in times of external adversity and stress, they're not very good at managing boredom or societal stigma. As an analogy, I am not a failed blonde. I am a valid brunette. This is who I am, and I can be proud of that. Another analogy, right-handed tools are terrible for left-handed people. Lefties are not broken righties. Watching television, films, reading books, listening to music, visiting art galleries and going to shows fills me with pride that the creative side of humanity is so vital to who we are as a people. The vast majority of the people who create these are ADHDers. ADHD is also found commonly in science. A common trait of ADHD is being cool and functional in highly stressful situations. And the ADHDers with these traits are often our emergency workers. Loneliness can be a common trait of the ADHDer that doesn't know that they have ADHD. ADHDers often find that having compatible ADHD friends is more fulfilling than trying to fit into the neurotypical friendship groups, where you may feel like an imposter or hollow, not welcome, in a crowd but not of the crowd. It can be incredibly lonely. It doesn't have to be. I have many clients come to see me in adulthood for help with their struggles. I ask them if they know they are ADHDers, and frequently they don't. Once we have done the checks to ensure that we are on the right track, a common part of the diagnosis is to gather evidence from childhood, which often means talking to parents. Around half the people I see had parents that were told their child was likely ADHD in childhood, but they did nothing about it to avoid drugging their child or labeling them. This not only led to a life of misery, but to them being labeled lazy, difficult, stupid, or worse. Diagnosis and medication is shown to significantly decrease the risk of drug addiction and death from suicide. Parents. Yes, you parents. Your kid is going to get labelled regardless. Do you want the label to be useful or hindering? ADHD is only a stigma if you perpetuate that stigma. Many ADHDers have multiple hobbies, many areas of special interest, and become good at many things. ADHDers like to stay active and often don't need to relax. Having to take time to recover from injuries or illness can be very tedious. ADHDers like novelty over repetition. ADHDers are often accused of being very extroverted, while most will identify as introverts. The stigma against ADHD is very strong, while the reality is that ADHDers are often lovely people who are just trying to get along in a world that no longer really values the neurology that helped humans survive, innovate, and become the dominant macro species. We have quite a lot of ADHD information on our website, and we will be posting more here on this channel. Like, subscribe, and share to help us reach more people with actual, useful, helpful content. But don't hit the bell notification, it's annoying for everyone.